Reverend Fathers, distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of the Ukrainian Community of America, Illinois Division, largest organization representing the Ukrainian community here in Chicagoland for 40 years, I want to welcome each and every one of you for our second in a series of town hall meetings with the very distinguished Senator Dick Durbin. I'd just like to say that obviously in addition to the many Ukrainians that we have here, we have a number of additional guests who have joined us, including Stanley Balzikis, Honorary Consul of the Republic of Lithuania, President of the Balzikis Museum, and Vice President of the Lithuanian American Council. We have Saulius Kupris, President of the Lithuanian American Council and a member of the Central and Eastern European Coalition. Rimas Dirihontis of the Lemont Lithuanian Community. L. Kozlowskas, Vice President, Lithuanian American Council. Janis Vilsinis, representative of the Latvian community. Dr. Ana Gil Garcia with the Venezuelan community of Chicago. Representing the Polish community and the Polish American Congress, we have Henryk Marciniak and Ted Palka, respectively. And we also have Natala Sanishvili, Chair of the Georgian Cultural Center of Illinois. Welcome one and all. We were in this very hall 2 weeks ago when Senator Durbin gave his previous town hall with us. And in that 2-week period, a lot has happened. Some of it not very good, quite frankly. We obviously are following the situation in Ukraine, not just day by day, but hour by hour and moment by moment. And we certainly hope, pray, and count on our friends to help us make it through that situation. Following the last town hall, right after Senator Durbin left us, he went right to Washington and he immediately introduced a very strong resolution into the Senate which reflected the commentary and input that was brought up in this very hall, and we are very appreciative of what you did immediately on that, Senator. In addition, over the last 2 weeks, many people in this room went to Washington, D.C. to express our gratitude to the Obama administration and to our friends in Congress, and especially to you, Senator. And we were joined by thousands and thousands of Ukrainians in front of the White House, and many of our friends, representatives of the communities that we have here today, who joined us in unity to support Ukraine. We were there to make sure that not only did we express our gratitude, but we needed to remind our people they must be in touch with our congressmen and senators to remain friends of Ukraine and support Ukraine. Also, in that time period, there were 2 city council resolutions which were introduced, and we hope to have Alderman Joe Moreno with us a little bit later, who will speak specifically on those. And then, what has brought us here now is that Senator Durbin not only listened to us, not only introduced resolutions, but he got up, packed a suitcase, and went to Ukraine to meet with the Ukrainian leadership and assess the situation personally, and we are very appreciative of his personal commitment to go out there and do that. Just a few brief comments. Momentarily, I will introduce Julian Kulis, who will, of course, introduce the senator. Senator Durbin will make some remarks, and then we will have a question and answer period. In order to maximize the senator's time here, we request that all questions be submitted in writing. We have many aides from the senator on the sides here who have comment cards. So if you have questions, please raise your hand. They will come over, they will give you a card, and you'll be able to complete that and submit that so we can make sure we get as many questions answered as possible today. I will then come back and close out the formal program, and the senator will conduct a very brief press conference off here to the side. So, without further ado, I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce a gentleman who was the very first president of the Ukrainian Congress Committee of Illinois, elected 40 years ago, Julian Kulis.
Reverend Fathers, ladies and gentlemen, we have the honor to hear today from one of the nation's leading statesmen, a man of reason and judgment, unwavering devotion to his country, and I might add, his devotion to the cause of the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian nation. Senator Durbin is not only the second highest ranking member of the United States Senate, but he also has the position in Congress and in the Senate. He is the chairman of the Senate Defense Appropriations Committee. He also serves on the subcommittee on European Affairs, which has jurisdiction over matters concerning the continent of Europe, including the Caucasus. Its responsibilities include the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, the European Union, and the Organizations for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Senator Durbin has been a leading supporter of the movement in Ukraine, the democratic movement in Ukraine. He is the author of several Senate resolutions calling for sanctions against the Yanukovych regime and lately against the Russian Federation. Last week, the Senator, together with Senator McCain, led a delegation of 8 senators to Ukraine to meet with the interim Ukrainian government and other senior cabinet members to discuss the current political situation in Ukraine and the Crimean invasion. As you know, Senator Durbin visited Ukraine in 2012, and he met with Yanukovych and the Prime Minister Azarov at that time. He was kind enough at that time to meet with our Congress committee here in Chicago and give us a briefing on his meeting. I know that he just arrived from Washington after a long trip from Ukraine and probably is experiencing some jet lag, but he agreed to come to Chicago and meet our community and share his observations and also report on the meetings with the people in Ukraine. We are most grateful to the Senator for his service and support on behalf of the Ukrainian people and the Ukrainian nation. Kindly let's welcome a true friend of the Ukrainian community and Ukraine, Senator Dick Durbin.
Thank you very much. I might say when I heard all of the people who were being introduced here, the Lithuanian community, the Latvian community, the Venezuelan community, the Polish community, all I can say is happy St. Patrick's Day to everyone who's gathered here. This is so typical of Chicago. We have them all. And I want to say at the outset, I just returned this morning, 5 a.m. this morning from Kyiv. We flew all night. Landed in Washington, I did a Meet the Press show this morning, got on a plane, flew to Chicago. Everywhere I went in Ukraine, and I mentioned Illinois and Chicago, the smile came on their face. Because they know not only the size of the Ukrainian American population, in this great city and state, but they know how close you are to them. Many of you still have families, many of you have many friends there, you have great memories and great pride of your Ukrainian citizenship originally, and now of course your pride in being Americans. But they know that as much as any city in America, maybe more, Chicago is watching Kyiv, Chicago is watching Ukraine. It is important for us to know, and for them to know, that we are together in this effort. Now let me tell you, let me spend a few minutes here and tell you what has happened in the last 72 hours, because each part of it is so critically important. I don't assign any special significance, but I am proud of the fact that 8 United States senators, 5 Republicans, 3 Democrats, got on a plane Thursday night in Washington, flew all night to Kyiv, landed, spent the entire day on Friday meeting with leaders in the government, got 1 night's sleep. We were supposed to go to Donetsk yesterday, but unfortunately there was too much turmoil and we were afraid that it would turn into a media incident that might be used by the Russians, and so on the advice of the Ukrainian government, we stayed in Kyiv, and many of their leaders came to see us in Kyiv all day yesterday. I'll just give you, and please forgive me, my Ukrainian is not what it should be, if I mispronounce some of the names of the people that we met with, but some of the names will be familiar to you. We met with Ukrainian cabinet officials, First Deputy Prime Minister Vitaly Yarema, Head of the National Security and Defense Council, Andriy Parabi, forgive me, Head of the SBU, Valentin Nalivashenko, I'm getting better, the Svoboda leader, Ole Tienbach, is that close? They're correcting me all the way here. Acting President Alexander Turkinov. There was a whole group of civic leaders from the Maidan. Then we met with Crimean Tatar leader Mustafa Zhemilev. He is also a member of parliament. We met with Vitaly Klitschko, a big, big man. We met with representatives of the parties of the regions, Serhiy Levochkin and Serhiy Tihipko, okay? Governor of Donetsk came to meet with us. His name is Serhiy Taruta. He is a very wealthy man. And we met with, our last meeting was with Prime Minister Yatsenyuk. I met with him in Washington for an hour, and then we met for even longer yesterday. His Finance Minister, Alexander Shlapak, hope that's correct, close. Economic Development Minister, Pavlo Sheremetyev. So let me tell you what we did. First, we went to the Maidan. And obviously that is something that you have to see it to believe it. And what we see now is just what is left of what was an amazing outpouring of public sentiment for change in Ukraine. All along the Maidan, there are these shrines to the 103 people who were killed during the course of this demonstration. They took us and showed us the bullet holes in the trees and in the light posts and in the buildings and where they came from, and they came from the direction of government buildings, shooting down on people, killing them on the street. There are shrines set up in every direction. There are many people still there. I don't know how they will be able to reclaim this area. It is not only a battleground, it is a sacred ground to the people of Ukraine for what has happened there and what they have been through. That is where we start. The delegation, I was the senior Democrat, Senator John McCain, the senior Republican. We headed up the delegation. John McCain had been there, I believe in December the 20th, I think that date's correct, with Senator Chris Murphy of Connecticut, who is also Ukrainian. They had been there and seen the actual demonstrations. If any of you know the trade union building on this Maidan, it has been torched and burned. It is just a hull, a skeleton of a structure still remaining. So there's clear evidence that violence took place, that people were killed. And if we went into the Rada, into Parliament to meet there, they have a shrine that has been set up with the photos of all the victims, the 103 victims who were killed in the course of these demonstrations. I thought that was a right place to start. We all did. because we were trying to feel, those of us who had not been there during this period of time, the intensity of feeling and the emotions that were part of what led to this change in the government. Now, as we met and talked, we learned many, many things, and I will try to share some of them with you. First, it is very clear that there is a challenging agenda ahead for Ukraine. Challenging. First, the economy. The economy is very weak. They need help. Last week, before we left on this trip, Senator McCain, Senator Flake, who was also on the trip, and myself, voted in the Senate Foreign Relations Committee to send $1 billion in loans to Ukraine immediately and to set up the process for the International Monetary Fund to provide them up to $15 billion. That money is going to keep their economy going, moving forward. It is absolutely essential. As we heard and talked to people, it is clear that there's going to have to be significant reforms in Ukraine. And there is fear, there is worry about whether the people of Ukraine will receive this, will accept this. The International Monetary Fund is going to ask for some significant changes. Changes in pensions, changes in gas utility rates, changes in property taxes and the like. Many of these things are not popular here, so I can imagine how unpopular they would be there. And there is a concern. Prime Minister Yatsenyuk said to the International Monetary Fund, don't push us too far or you'll soon be dealing with another political party. I think kind of signaling that there's only so far and so fast that Ukraine can move to make these economic changes. And yet they know these changes have to take place. There is still controversy in Congress about the International Monetary Fund role. I believe it's essential. I voted for it. I will continue to. I don't know any other way to provide the assistance that Ukraine needs today. The second part of this resolution that we passed last week deals with sanctions. Sanctions on those guilty of corruption in Ukraine. I will tell you, as I listen to everyone, there are obviously political charges going back and forth. But each party says of the other party, they're corrupt, we're not. I'll let someone else sort out the actual truth and facts and details engaged in this. But there is a commitment, a growing commitment of those who are in power, the coalition in power, to move toward reforming the government. As they say, not just new faces, but a new system in Ukraine that really brings some change and some honesty to the situation. The third part of this is the focus of why we're here today at this moment, and that is the threat to the nation of Ukraine and the threat particularly in the Crimea. We learned a lot about what is going on there, and it is frightening what is happening. The Russians have mobilized forces all around Ukraine. They have strike helicopters and strike fighters in Belarus. They have set up planes that are monitoring activity. They have troops on the border in Belarus. They obviously have those on the border of Russia with Ukraine. And clearly they've started since the end of the Olympics, moving more and more Russian troops into Crimea. At this moment, I am fearful for the 4,000 or 5,000 Ukrainian army members who are still in Crimea. Many of them have been encircled. They are in camps and buildings cut off from the outside. They don't have food, they don't have access to the outside. They are basically being held hostage in Crimea. You know what's happened too if you watch the news. The Russians have moved in forces and they're not wearing Russian uniforms. Their uniforms have no insignia on them. They're wearing masks over their faces, baklava, over their faces. That's Greek, isn't it, baklava? Well, I'm close, you know what I mean. What? Balaklava. Much different. Balaklavas over their face. And so you can't tell who they are. They are standing in the hotels, they're standing outside the polling places, and this sham of an election is taking place. Maybe it's finished by now, since we're later in time. But we know what these elections are like. We know what they're like in Lithuania and in Poland. You know what a Soviet election is like. We've seen too many of them. The results are decided in advance. The people are given few, if any, choices. And in this circumstance, they are under the intimidation of the Russian soldiers who were there and these other masked gunmen who were standing around them. The President, the United Nations, all but Russia, have condemned these elections as phony. They shouldn't be accepted as honest or truthful. And they don't reflect what the people feel. In addition, the Russians for the last 2 weeks have been going throughout Crimea saying to policemen, change your hat, become a policeman for the Russian Federation, we will triple your salary. Your pensioners, we'll take care of your pension from this point forward. They're making all these grand promises to people in Crimea if they will affiliate with the Russian Federation. And that, I think, is pretty obvious what they're trying to do, is to move them in that direction. The great fear beyond this referendum, beyond what happens in Crimea, is what happens in eastern Ukraine next. There are some elements here that are especially worrisome. The water and electricity coming into Crimea comes from this eastern region of Ukraine. You can imagine the Russians who have held so many countries hostage, the Baltics, other countries with natural gas, turning it off, raising the prices. They are going to move in, we're afraid, into eastern Ukraine to try to capture these sources of utilities going into Crimea. There's an abiding fear that that is their next step. In Donetsk, you've seen the demonstrations that have gone back and forth between those who are pro-Russia and those who are pro-Ukraine. And the governor who came to speak to us is a very successful businessman. He recently appointed governor of that oblast, and he said we were trying to keep the tensions low. As the Prime Minister said to us yesterday, we don't want to create a circumstance where Russians holding passports are killed in eastern Ukraine, giving Putin a new excuse to move into this area. So that is an ongoing fear of where we are. Let me speak a little bit about the political situation as we learn from speaking to a variety of different people. There is an election scheduled on May 25th. The Party of Regions is asking to postpone it. I don't believe that will happen. I believe the current government is going to move forward with this election for president on May 25th. Parliamentary elections are likely to follow. We met several of the candidates, including Mr. Klitschko, and they talked about their vision of where we are going, where they are going in Ukraine, and is clearly on the path to reform. There is a belief that the Party of Regions needs to be part of the future of Ukrainian's government because of the territory they represent, the people that are part of it. And I sensed in some of their statements a willingness, now that Yanukovych is gone, to join into this conversation about the future. I think we all know the bottom line here. Putin has dreams of restoring the Russian Empire. He said that the worst thing that happened in the 20th century was the elimination of the Soviet Union. There are many of us who see that much differently. And I'm sure those who are here today see it differently too. If the Russian Empire is dream, he realizes Ukraine is a critical part of that empire. That is why he's moving in that direction now. That is why he's moved into Crimea, and why when Yanukovych was gone, he started showing force around Ukraine. Now let's talk a moment about the Ukrainian army. I've heard different estimates of how many people are in the Ukrainian army. Up to 150,000, some people have said. But during the course of the Yanukovych regime, they weakened this army to the point where there's virtually nothing left. According to the Prime Minister, he says we don't have anything that will shoot, fly, or run in our army. They are asking for us to provide them, the United States provide them the most basics. They are asking for sleeping bags, food, fuel, tires, basic things that you would need, communications equipment. It just isn't there. The Prime Minister said that he thought that there were maybe 6,000 Ukrainian soldiers ready to fight. 6,000. And when you look at what they're up against, an army of over 800,000 in Russia. So it is clear that they would be easily and quickly overwhelmed. We're hoping, praying that it never comes to that moment. We are starting to send non-lethal aid, but I think as this develops, that will not be enough. I think we need to be prepared to not only provide military assistance, but also to link up with Ukraine and to build their own defense forces, to make certain that they can stand and defend themselves. I don't know what will happen next. I spoke to Secretary of State John Kerry yesterday. He had finished his meeting with Lavrov, 6 hours that they walked and talked, and he was flying back from London to Washington when we spoke on his airplane last night. He believes that what is happening with Putin is not just the ordinary government of Russia sitting around and deciding the fate of Ukraine, but a new group of advisors who are around him, who are hardline people, who want to return to Soviet times. And he thinks those are the people he's listening to at this moment. Well, his actions speak louder than any words I can say. What he's done in Crimea, what he's threatening to do in the rest of Ukraine, is just basically by the script that we have seen so many times in so many different places. And here's what it comes down to, my friends, and why you have my fellow countrymen from Lithuania and Latvia and the Baltics and Poland and others here. We cannot stand idly by and allow this to happen. We cannot let Putin recapture his empire, whatever he may dream that to be, at the expense of free people who have had their independence now, many of them for over 20 years, who enjoy the fact that they are a nation and they have their own voices making the decisions for their future. And so what we need to do is to gather together those freedom-loving countries all around the world. We did it last night in the UN Security Council. One negative vote from Russia, one abstention from China, all the rest of the countries voting with the United States and voting against Putin and what he was doing in Crimea. We've got to continue to build on that. And last time I was here, many of you suggested move in the U.S. military. I will just tell you quite honestly, that is not going to happen. It is not going to happen. The Prime Minister has made it clear he is not asking for that and he doesn't expect it. And our government has not offered it. It is not in the cards. It's not in the realm of possibility now. But that doesn't mean we do nothing. There are things we can do that will affect Russia. Have you seen what's happened to the stock market? Just because of this Crimea action, it's gone down 10 or 15%. Their economy is starting to feel it. Now we're talking about sanctions that limit the travel of Russians, not only to the United States, but around the world. And then the question of freezing assets. There's a significant number of Russian assets in the United States. It is estimated some $500 billion on account in the United States. And these oligarchs love to travel to their townhomes in London and to places all over the world. And if they are limited in their travel, we start to make life a little uncomfortable at the top in Moscow. More than that, we've got to look to other efforts that we can take with our allies from all around the world to speak out against this and to take action against the moves that have been made by Putin. Let me close by saying, before I open it to questions, it was 23 years ago in Lithuania, or 24, and I remember 24, and I remember it. I was a congressman at the time, and here was this little country. They showed me their arsenal once in the Seimas, the parliament in Vilnius. It was about 6 hunting rifles. That's all they had, 6 hunting rifles. But they had courage. And Gorbachev moved in his tanks, and that courage held. How many people were killed at the radio tower? 13 people, 13 Lithuanians killed at the radio tower. In Latvia, people were killed in the parks in Riga. And when it was all over, these countries emerged, independent and strong of Moscow. So it takes more than the mighty army of Russia or the Soviet Union to overcome the determination of people who want to be free. In the Maidan, we saw that. I believe we'll see it again. We need to stand by the people in Ukraine and people all across Europe and around the world who are fighting and striving for freedom and who are pushing back against the dictators who would reestablish their control over this region. You've seen it happen. You saw this miracle occur once before. We will see it again. And we have to be by their side. The United States has to lead. The United States has to be part of the leadership with the European Union. We have to make it clear that the values that we have as Americans are values we're willing to stand up for all around the world, including in Ukraine. So let me stop at this point. It looks like there are more questions than I'll ever be able to answer, but I will try my best. But thank you all for coming out this afternoon.
Thank you very much, Senator. Before we get to the questions, and you're absolutely right, there are many, many questions here, and I don't know that we're going to be able to get through all of them. I do want to welcome Alderman Bob Fioretti, who has joined us here. Welcome, Alderman.
Thank you very much. I've been to Kiev, and I know what the people that want freedom is all about.
And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, within the last 2 weeks, 2 resolutions were introduced in Chicago City Council. One of the co-sponsors of both of those resolutions is here with us today, and I'd like to ask Alderman Joe Morano from the First Ward to come up here and fill us in on those, please.
Welcome to the Ukrainian village if you're not living here in 2 parts of the First Ward and the Second Ward. I am not going to come close to answering any questions like the Senator has. And how about another round of applause for our incredible Senator, Senator Dick Durbin. I'm proud, I'll be brief, I'm proud to announce that at the last City Council, myself, as representing part of Ukrainian Village, and Alderman Ed Burke, introduced 2 resolutions. The first resolution calls for all cargo and commercial, if there are any flights to Russia, to end out of O'Hare and Midway airports until Russia withdraws unilaterally from Crimea and the Ukrainian country. Second resolution, we have many sister cities in Russia, Chicago does. The resolution calls for the immediate seizing of any activity or any sister relationships with any city in Russia until the Russians withdraw from Ukraine. We will be discussing both resolutions and meeting on and voting on those resolutions this month. My office, the date is not set yet, but when it is, I encourage you to spread it throughout your communities and to attend this public hearing where we'll be voting on both of these important resolutions, because I feel, of course, we cannot do as much as the Senator can as a city, but I do feel, and I know Alderman Ed Burke does, if we start this, New York does this, Los Angeles does this, Miami does this, Philadelphia does this, we'll start a wave throughout the United States to show the Ukrainian people that we're with them and the Russian people that we're not with them. Thank you very much.
Yes. First question. What Putin is doing is not about Crimea. It is about expanding Russia's influence in Ukraine, the entire Black Sea and Eastern European region. This is a direct threat to the security interests of the United States and Europe. It is an invasion of a sovereign country and the greatest violation of world security since World War II. Will the United States send financial aid, institute serious sanctions, and now that there is a Russian military invasion, will the U.S. help the Ukrainian military with weapons, technology, intelligence, and military strategy? What will be our response? And are we going to let Putin dictate the rules of engagement and humiliate the U.S.?
I would vote for every one of those. I believe that those are all part of our response. The economic assistance is critical. The assistance for the Ukrainians right now in terms of military preparedness, what Yanukovych did to the army, I've said before, devastated the army. There's very little left there. The Prime Minister was very open about that in Washington and again in Kyiv yesterday. We need to help them. Now, there have been votes in the past, as you know, about NATO membership, and they haven't succeeded in Ukraine. And I think there was a feeling, at least at that point, that perhaps that would be too provocative. It would go right in the face of Moscow. So let's try to keep a balance and keep Ukraine somewhere between those 2 poles. Well, this has changed. Now it's up to the people of Ukraine to decide as to what their future will be. I hope and I believe with this government, it clearly will be with the West. They want to move toward more affiliation with Europe, more trade with Europe. Whether they decide at some later time to apply to become members of NATO and whether they can go through that remains to be seen. That's a decision to be made by Ukraine. In the meantime, though, there is going to be an opportunity for Georgia to move forward in NATO membership, which I support. There's a question about reestablishing the radars in Poland so that Mr. Putin understands that there is a price to be paid for some of the anti-missile defense radars I'm referring to, price to be paid for his aggression. We have got to take this extremely seriously, and those suggestions are all very positive.
Thank you, Senator. Senator, the United States is one of the guarantors and signers of the Budapest Memorandum, whereby Ukraine relinquished its nuclear weapons in exchange for guarantee of its sovereignty and territorial integrity, which have been grossly violated by Russia. What can the U.S. do to protect the value of its guarantees in the eyes of the international community? And the follow-up question is, why have the guarantor nations not convened a conference?
So the four nations that signed the Budapest Agreement, which I believe was in 94, I think 1994, the four nations were the United Kingdom, the United States, Russia, and Ukraine. At that time, Ukraine was the third strongest nuclear power in the world. They had nuclear weapons just behind Russia and the United States. And they agreed to give those up, to allow those to be destroyed. And this agreement was a recognition that their territorial sovereignty would be protected in the future. Their borders would be protected in the future. All four of those nations signed. Now I've read through it, and I do have to take exception to one part of it. It was not a mutual defense pact. It was not a guarantee that we will protect you. That is what NATO is all about. The NATO is an alliance where if one of our members is attacked, all others rally behind it. That was not specified in this agreement. It was a statement of principle signed, I believe, by Yeltsin. John McCain and I were talking about that last night. We think Yeltsin might have been in Russia at the time. But it did not include the guarantee language, which many people think it did, that said, we will come in and protect you, come to your defense. So it was a statement of principle. I think it is a worthy one. And as someone brought up at the last meeting, if we're trying to convince Iran and North Korea to do away with their nuclear weapons, they have to believe that at the end of the day, they can still have their borders safe afterwards. So this is a matter of principle, I will agree. It was not in the nature of a defense pact or a security pact like a NATO agreement.
Thank you, Senator. We want to know, what message does the U.S. Congress send when it publicly declares it is giving Ukraine $1 billion in aid, which was widely publicized, and then Rand Paul and his Republican allies obstruct passage of this particular aid package? What is the message that's being sent? And the follow-up is, what are the chances of Congress passing the financial aid package after the recess, with or without reforming IMF?
Somebody here is watching C-SPAN. So here's what happened. On the day that we left, on Thursday, the Senate Foreign Relations Committee took up this measure, which included the three parts that I mentioned earlier. The $1 billion loan, the authorization for the International Monetary Fund, and sanctions against corruption in Ukraine and against Russia. It was called for a vote, and the vote was 14-3. We had voting for it Senators McCain, who was on the trip with me, Senator Corker of Tennessee, and Senator Flake of Arizona. Those three Republicans, along with all the Democrats, voted for it. We sent it to the floor and tried to call it for passage before we're on a break for this next week, a recess for this next week. So we tried to call it on Thursday night on the floor, and there was an objection. You have to have unanimous consent to call things that quickly. So at that point, when there was an objection from the other side of the aisle, Senator Harry Reid said, I'm filing the papers so that as soon as we return, which will be a week from tomorrow, we will vote on this measure. So it's going to come up, and here's what it comes down to. We need 60 votes. I believe we will have all the Democrats. We need 5 Republicans. John McCain said, I'll get you the 5 Republicans. I know John McCain is pretty persuasive. I think he will bring more than 5. I hope he does. I want this to be bipartisan. Now that's the Senate. So the Senate, I think, will approve just what was described. I can't speak for the House at all. At this point, the House Representatives has not moved forward as the Senate has not brought all these things into one measure. They have not done anything with the International Monetary Fund, and there's some question as to whether they ever will allow the International Monetary Fund to come into Ukraine and help them. That still has to be resolved. Your voices, and I know that you all don't live in this neighborhood, many of you live around the area, your voices to your members of Congress, members of the House of Representatives, about how important this is. Now is the time to tell the members of the House.
Great, thank you, Senator. It's been said that the United States donated supplies of food to Ukraine, and yesterday, I believe you were quoted that the Ukrainian military defense system has nothing that will run, shoot, or fly. Do you anticipate the United States providing those resources to Ukraine?
That was a direct quote from the Prime Minister, who repeated it. He said it in Washington to us, he said it again when we were in Kyiv. It's an overstatement, but not by much, not by much. They really, I don't know what Yanukovych did, but they spend about $1.5 billion a year on the military, which is hardly enough when you consider the threat that they're facing. So they have a limited budget for their nation, their economy is weak, we need to help them to have military assistance and preparation so they can rebuild their military to defend their country. But at this point in time, as I said, the Prime Minister believes 6,000 combat-ready troops. One footnote. Some of you know where Feodosia is, Feodosia in the Crimean Peninsula. There is a group of 600 Ukrainian Marines in Feodosia. And several times when our people briefed us, they said they will never surrender. They won't give up. They'll fight. Now that hasn't happened yet. There haven't been confrontations between Russians and Ukrainians or people at actual military confrontation. So we kept bringing up Feodosia time and again. And there was a concern that, as I said, 4,000 to 5,000 military in Crimea are vulnerable now to the Russians who are present. And there is fear that that may break out into some sort of a confrontation. And I hope it doesn't for the sake of those 600.
Senator Durbin, Russia has clearly developed a model based on false pretexts for invading and annexing other countries. Georgia and Ukraine are just the first victims of this. Moldova and others will soon follow. How can countries in the vicinity of Russia, not protected by NATO or China, avoid being swallowed by Russia?
More and more are protected by NATO. The Baltics, Poland, they're part of the NATO alliance, which in my mind was, I finally breathed a little easier about Lithuania when it became part of NATO. So I realized we were in an alliance, a protective alliance together. But it is true, there are nations that are not. Moldova is a good example. The Transnistria region, I understand Russian troops are there or can use that region freely, which is, those of you who know the geography better than I do in that region, is just another threat to Ukraine from where they're located. So it is true that the Russians are trying to find some way to encircle Ukraine. They have this crazy man Lukashenko in Belarus who will do anything that they want to station and position their troops. And so it's a continued worry. My belief is that the only way to deal with this is to expand the NATO alliance to include countries that want to join. It has to be their decision, Ukraine's decision. But if they are willing to join and willing to prepare themselves, then we need to invite them into NATO for their own safety. We cannot assume that Putin is going to wake up tomorrow and be a different person. He showed 8 years ago when he invaded the Republic of Georgia that he would do that, and he did it again in Crimea. I've been to Georgia. There's someone here from Georgia, I believe, representing the country. Thank you for being with us. And I went into Tbilisi, and then they took me out on the road to see South Ossetia and Abkhazia, thank you, Abkhazia. And they are basically, they look like barbed wire fences and military garrisons inside this occupied territory. The president of Georgia came to see me the day after the Sochi Olympics ended, and he said as soon as the Olympics ended, Putin put a new roll of barbed wire around the fences. He wanted to wait until all the tourists were gone. So I take this very seriously, and I think we should.
Thank you. Senator Durbin, do you have any words for the Venezuelan community and the crisis in Venezuela? You're very concerned about human rights violations there.
Venezuela has been through so much, and with the new government and the human rights questions that have been raised in that part of the world, Maduro is at the head of the current administration regime in that country. I'm very concerned about that, and we all are. It's a great nation that has been under Chavez, now under Maduro, has really been, I won't say an enemy of the United States, but has separated itself from the United States over and over and over again. I think the Venezuelan people deserve better. And I hope that there is a peaceful way to reach that. I hope we can join and help that to occur, because I know that innocent people are dying now in the streets of Venezuela.
One question here. In lieu of recent developments in Ukraine, do you think Ukraine should pursue returning to nuclear status?
Oh, I hope not. I hope not. I think that I can understand where someone may suggest that, but we are not a safer world with more countries with nuclear weapons. We have got to reach a point where we limit the expansion of these weapons, particularly when they're at the expense of global stability. And I might say, it is a very expensive undertaking in a country that is struggling economically, that needs so much for its own people. I would hate to see that happen. It's far better, if that is something crossing their mind, to actively debate NATO membership as another way of guaranteeing their future.
And do you believe Putin is acting in such a bold manner because he considers the USA to be financially weak and vulnerable at present?
Well, we're certainly not financially weak, and our military is the best in the world, period. But let me be very candid with you, open with you about this. Americans are war weary. After Iraq and Afghanistan, the cost in human lives, the cost in terms of our treasure, people now have been reluctant to even consider military action. Remember a few months ago when we found chemical weapons in Syria? The president said, give me the authority if I need it to take military action, not to put soldiers there, but to take military actions against Assad in Syria, if that's what it takes to stop these chemical weapons. The Congress rejected it. I voted in the committee to give him the authority because I thought those chemical weapons, the third strongest chemical weapons nation in the world, Syria, was a threat to the people in that area and to the region and all the countries in that region. But the sentiment, political sentiment, was not there in my party for the president to have this authority. It wasn't there in the Republican Party. I talked to one of the more conservative members, Republican members with me on this trip, and he said, my mail was running 98-2 against Obama when he asked for some military authority to deal with Assad and chemical weapons. So the national and public sentiment, when we talk about war, I think is very strong to keep the United States out of another war. I know that there are many people here who think, my goodness, what's going to happen? There are other things we can do in this 21st century, short of moving troops. There are other ways we can put pressure on the economy, as we have in Iran, that really creates a difference. And I hope it never comes to that, but we're building it, if necessary, to stop Putin.
Senator, I've been told we have time for just two quick questions and we have to wrap this up. How quickly can we move with our NATO allies to speed up NATO membership for Georgia and Moldova?
I think Georgia is coming up very quickly. I'm not sure if it's the fall of this year or next year. Moldova, I'm not so sure. I don't know what their status is. But there is a memorandum of agreement that is supposed to be part of the next step for Georgia, and I think that's the right thing to do. They have had an orderly, peaceful transition of government power, which is a good sign of a stable nation, and they have certainly faced Putin's wrath 8 years ago. So putting them into NATO at this point makes sense to me. Moldova is another story. I need to know more about whether they're prepared to go and how close they are. I just don't know that well enough to speak to it at this moment.
Okay, and final question. Given that so many of our European allies are completely dependent or significantly dependent on energy supplies from Russia, what can be done to counter the Russian supply of gas and energy to our European allies?
Thank you for asking that question. I should have raised this earlier because it really, as you all know, this is one of the biggest factors. When we say sanctions against Russia, it is one thing. It would, of course, affect American companies. Companies like, if there was a cutoff of trade, companies like Boeing, headquartered here in Chicago, Caterpillar, headquartered downstate in Illinois, John Deere, they all do business with Russia. And if we cut off our trade with Russia, it will have an impact on these and thousands of other companies. But there's also a question of what it would mean to the European Union. The European Union and many of the countries there depend on Russia for their natural gas. Large portions of it, 25, 30, 40% of their natural gas. Now, I don't believe, I hope it never reaches that point where there is a threat of cutoff, but they've got to take this into their calculation. If the cost of energy or the cost of natural gas goes up dramatically, that has an impact, a negative impact on the economies of the countries of the European Union. The President has been on the phone repeatedly with Angela Merkel. She is the strongest voice in the European Union in terms of what they will do, and she and the country are dependent on Russia for natural gas supplies. So it is understandable that she is measuring what she can do short of jeopardizing that energy supply for her economy. And I think what she asked the President to do was to try to negotiate something. She called Putin. She was doing everything she could to stop him from what he's doing right now, and certainly to stop him from moving in eastern Ukraine. And I think now we are moving to the point with the action of the UN Security Council, where the European Union and many other countries are willing to step up and face Putin, even if it means some deprivation in their own home economies. Now let's look to the longer term. I've thought about this over and over as it applies to Lithuania, the dependence Lithuania has on Gazprom and the natural gas coming in from Russia, and how we have to work with all of these countries to find alternatives. Right now, we have an abundance, a surplus of natural gas, more than we can use. It's a blessing that came to our surprise over the last 10 years. We are reaching energy independence in the United States and have natural gas supplies we never envisioned. The question is, can we export liquefied natural gas to any of these countries and establish a relationship with peaceful countries, the United States and others, to supply their energy? Can we work with these countries for alternative energy supplies? The Prime Minister of Georgia said to us, we think we can replace a lot of our natural gas needs with electricity. We have a good sources of electricity. And so nuclear and hydropower, for example, that they can rely on. So they need to reorder their energy pictures in each one of these countries so they're less dependent on Russia and give less power to Putin to make these decisions. Let's build up an energy independence in these countries, and Putin will lose the trump card that he plays over and over again. So let me tell you where we go from here, since that, I believe, was the last question. When we return in a week, we will take up this measure in the Senate. I believe it will pass the Senate. I will vote for it as I did in committee. It's a good, strong measure and a good step forward. But between now and then, we need to monitor what's happening in Crimea and Ukraine on a daily, as you said, hourly or even momentary basis, because things are changing so quickly in this region of the world. I think our country continues to have a requirement to speak out and to lead, and to make it clear that we are calling together our allies and friends around the world to do the same. Now, your part, in addition to your prayers, I say with the clergy here, in addition to your prayers, and reaching out to the people that you still know in Ukraine, reach out to your elected officials. I thank Alderman Moreno, Alderman Fioretti, who are here, clearly from the city council level to the state house to Congress. All of these people need to be contacted by you so that they know your heartfelt feelings about this situation in Ukraine, asking each of them, what can you do? I think what the city council has done already shows a dramatic commitment to move forward on this issue. This is where our American government goes to work, and you as individual citizens and voters have a voice to put it to work, and I hope you will. That was my third visit to Ukraine. The first was extremely brief, years and years ago, and the other one 2 years ago with the leaders. But I can't forget the images of Maidan. I can't forget the images of the 103 who died in an effort to bring change and freedom to Ukraine. And to think that Putin believes he can get by with this is just wrong. We can stop him from doing it if we stand together and stand strong in the United States. Thank you for being here today.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, in bringing our event to a close here, a sincere round of applause for Senator Dick Durbin and his commitment to help support and stand with Ukraine. We will be giving Senator Durbin a package of information here that we would like the Senator to share with his colleagues. By colleagues, we mean both Republicans and Democrats because the situation in Ukraine should not be a partisan matter. It is a matter of United States national security. It is a matter which requires Republicans and Democrats to work together in unity on this. And Senator Durbin is our leader in the Senate to make sure that bipartisanship does happen and help support the Ukrainian situation. We're very grateful for the time you spent with us, and we're certainly appreciative of the time that you will spend with your colleagues. We reach up to Almighty God and say, God bless America, God bless Senator Durbin, and God bless Ukraine. Slava Ukraini!